And now we're going to get to our main topic here on Mastering Dungeons this week, a continued look at the RPG Shadowdark. We looked originally at the basics of the game, the tone, the feel, what the game promised, what we can expect from it. Now we're going to dig deeper into the rules, including character creation and how the system works. I want to say that the designer and the force behind this game at the Arcane Library, Kelsey Dion, recently did a long chat talking about designing this game. I did not watch it. Not because I wasn't interested in it, because I'm very interested in it, but because I want to read the rules as a text and try to come up with my own conclusions about what the game does or doesn't do. When I'm done, then I'm going to go back and see Kelsey's interview to
Yeah,
see how my thoughts match with her design. You did watch it though, correct?
I did. Yep. I mean,
All
I
right.
can't spoil it
So
now for you.
Teos may be chiming in. Yeah. Well, no, feel free because I will have already read by the
Yeah,
time you speak,
that's true.
so we can do that.
Yeah.
So let's dive right in to where we left off last week, which was character creation. We know that like with D&D, the characters are called PCs, and they are going to have a name, ancestry rather than what we've been calling race, a class, level, and so on. So let's take a look at that. What are the ancestries in this book? Teos, take it away.
Yeah, it's dwarf, elf, goblin, half orc, halfling, and human. And each of these is, as simple and honed down, pared down as you could think. So, for example, the goblin, you speak common, you speak goblin. You have keen senses, which means you can't be surprised. That is your goblin package, right? And even the text that tells you about it is very, very small. So it is super pared down, right? The just the smallest amount of it says green, clever beings who thrive in dark, cramped places, as fierce as they are tiny. That's everything.
Mhm. Yep. So in all, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 28 words
Wow.
talking about this ancestry. Straight to the point, a short description, and then one thing they're known for, which of course here is keen senses, can't be surprised, and a little bit about the languages.
Yeah.
So goblins know common and goblin. And right there, I went, are languages going to be important in this game?
That's a good question.
Because you're using almost a third of the words that you need for what you're doing here to talk about what languages they know. And so as my designer brain goes, 33% of what you're talking about for this is the languages. So languages are going to be important. And so this is something I look at when I'm reviewing. And then part of me was like, I don't think languages are going to be that important in this game. Uh, so why are we including it? Uh, is it worth it to do this for nostalgia and for the little tiny bit of role playing that it will provoke from players?
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe not. We'll find out.
It's hard to say. And I mean, like the
But overall,
halfling,
yeah.
just the
Mhm.
halfling knows the common language, so no additional languages. And they are stealthy once per day that can become invisible for 3 rounds. Right? That's the entirety of the package. Human, you get to choose an
Mhm.
additional language out of the common list of languages, and you gain one additional talent roll at first level. Right, so very much like fifth edition alternate. But, very very interesting. My guess is that this language bit is trying to essentially do world building, right? Rather than saying
Mhm.
here's everything about goblins, it's saying they are a peoples. They're a people. That's They've got
Right.
a community of some sort. That's why they have a language. Moving on, right? We don't have more space to spend here. So that's what you need to know. And this game is, in theory, I think with the bulk of what you read here, is not about kind of big world building campaign integration. It's more about dungeon delving. So then we don't need to maybe know that much about them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Maybe.
unless you're coming across creatures that you part of the fun of role-playing games are those situations where you need to communicate with something but you can't.
Right.
Um, but even then, that only carries a little bit of fun, a little bit of weight, because it becomes a burden if you try to do it again and again and again. So it's interesting for me to look at what has this game pared down and what has it left in and why.
Yeah.
Uh, and so that's one thing. And point taken on the world building. Uh, halflings. I didn't even realize that, but halflings don't have their own language, but
Yeah.
goblins do. So
Yeah.
what
It's
does that
interesting.
tell us?
I don't know. Yeah, and there are
Mm-hmm.
only 10 common languages in the game. The only ones that might be a little
Mm-hmm.
surprising, there's a Marin, which is sort of like aquatic creatures. There is a reptilian, lizard folks and viperians. There is a Thanian, which is minotaurs, beastmen, manticores. Otherwise, it's, the ones you might expect. There's giant, there's sylvan, everything else is just kind of common ancestry ones. And then there are just 4 rare languages: celestial, diabolic, draconic, primordial. So one would, I guess, think that one would run into a lot of things to talk to. And if you have a diverse set of characters, you'd probably be able to talk to most of them. Maybe. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Interesting question. We will continue to read the game to find out. Well, covering the ancestries, we now know what comes next, and that are the classes, which of we have 4. We have the fighter, we have the priest, we have the thief, and we have the wizard. I have a feeling that there is room for expansion here, and that we will see other classes if we haven't already, either homebrewed or published by the Arcane Library. But as with the races, the classes are quite stripped down. We get a brief description starting with the fighter. We get a brief description: blood-soaked gladiators, acrobatic duelists, far-eyed elven archers, etc. Weapons, they're proficient with all weapons. Armor, they're proficient with all armor and shields. Hit points, 1d8 per level. And then just a couple of powers that each class has. A hauler lets you add your Constitution modifier, if positive, to your number of gear slots. So you're going to be able to carry more, and you need to be able to carry more because armor is going to take up more slots than a
Yeah.
normal piece of equipment might. Weapon mastery, you choose a type of weapon, such as a longsword. You gain a +1 attack and damage with that weapon type. And additionally, you add half your level to these rolls, rounding down. Now, this game goes to level 10, so at the highest level, you're going to be at +5.
Yeah, pretty good.
And
And I
grit.
guess +6 total.
Yeah.
So that's pretty sweet.
Yep. And then grit, you choose either strength or dex, and you have advantage on checks of that type to overcome opposing forces, such as kicking down a door or slipping free of rusty chains. The first being a strength check, the second being a dexterity check. So it gives you that little bit of bonus for things other than straight up fighting. And then another talent, which you don't choose, but you roll. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So on your odd levels, you get to roll dice on a table, 2d6, and you get the one that you rolled. So this might be another weapon mastery. It might be +1 to attacks. It could be +2 to strength, con, or dex, your choice. +1 to armor class from one armor type, or +2 points to any stats, which is a common talent you'll see for these classes. So, I've heard, interestingly, one of the comments on our previous episode was that, these talents are something their players really are excited about. And I was kind of surprised by that, because it's a very light piece, but I think this is a light enough game that rolling on the table probably is pretty exciting across a campaign. I've not played a campaign where I got to level. I've played this game, but I haven't campaigned. And so, yeah, maybe it's simple enough that when you buy into it, you go, yeah, I want to get talent and see what I happen to come up with.
And the chart, so you understand, is one of those bell curve charts. So a 2 or a 12 are very specific things, whereas a 3 to 6 or an 11 to 10 are, less likely to come up. And then the 7 to 9 is probably the most likely to come up. And that's what gives you +2 to strength, dex, or constitution.
Yeah.
I don't remember from our previous looks. Can your attributes go up? Are they capped?
The stats page shows 18 plus is +4. So I would presume that if you get that high, there's nothing telling you that you can go higher. It's not like D&D where it shows it going up to 30. So my guess is it's capped at 18 from what I see here. But that's a great example of something that it doesn't talk about. It doesn't really say.
Right. Yeah. And so assuming that you roll the average every time at first, third, fifth, seventh, and ninth, so 5 times you get to roll on this talent chart, at least if you make it up to a 9th level fighter, you could be adding +2 5 times to those attributes. So it's sort of important to realize that. Now you're more likely to be starting with a lower attribute than you might for D&D. For D&D, if you're a strength-based fighter, you're probably starting with a 16 in that area. When you're rolling the way you roll here, there might be a chance that you aren't starting with a 16 or higher.
Right.
So there is more space to build that up.
Yep.
Did anything stand out for you with any of the other classes, Teos?
I mean, it's interesting to compare the spellcasting classes, the wizard or the priest. The wizard, no armor, dagger, staff, hit points 1d4 per level. You get some common and additional rare languages. So that is a help, right? With that kind of idea of speaking, you could, if you plan it out with the rest of the party, you could probably cover a lot of languages this way. You can learn spells from scroll, and you make a check to get that and add to your known spells. So it is that sort of spell book concept. 3 tier 1 wizard spells, and each level you choose new spells based on a table. We'll talk about magic later, which is its own unique thing. So, the wizard sort of gets less compared to, the fighter that had weapon mastery and grit, holler. You're really getting, I can learn from spells and I have spell casting because of the power of spells. Is that balanced? I don't know. I haven't played enough to know. I thought my spells were pretty powerful when I played. More powerful? That's hard to say. Especially when the fighter is getting, maybe +6 to attack at higher levels. Does that beat out my spells, which I may or may not be able to pull off? Good question. I don't know. The talent examples are kind of cool. Like you can make a random magic item of a type you choose. That's the one that's really rare. +2 to your int stat or +1 to wizard spellcasting checks, which is really important. Gain advantage on casting one spell learn one additional spell of any tier and then the whole +2 points to stats. The rogue is interesting because it doesn't, or the thief, I should say, it does not really have a whole lot. It has the backstab if the creature is unaware of your attack. So we get to that whole interpretation, right? It's not just flanking or adjacent or anything like that. They have to be unaware of you. You deal an extra weapon die of damage and add additional weapon dice equal to half your level. Then thievery is you have the necessary tools of the trade and adept at thieving skills. You're trained in the following tasks, and this is a game without skills. You're trained in the following tasks and have advantage on any associated checks: climbing, sneaking, and hiding, applying disguises, finding and disabling traps, delicate tasks such as picking pockets and opening locks. So it's sort of the things you would expect, but in a game without skills, we're sort of saying these kinds of things. Hey, you're trained at them, right? So it's an interesting way to balance it out.
Right. Yep. And unlike the previous editions of D&D, the earliest editions, which we've talked about before, where rogues or thieves got the ability to do these things, a percentage, which led the other players to say, well, can't I climb walls? Can't I do these things? How come the rogue is the only one that can? This doesn't do that because it doesn't say other people can't climb, can't sneak, can't hide, can't disable traps. It says you have advantage on those associated checks. So that makes up for that previous edition fallacy that other people couldn't do the thing that you were given permission to do.
Right. Though it is also, I mean, there's a reason why D&D is more complicated, and that is that, the rogue will often try to put themselves into an advantageous situation, as all characters will, and then they get advantage plus all the benefits of their training and expertise and so on. If you put yourself into an advantageous situation in Shadowdark, well, you already have advantage. So you're gaining no benefit because advantage won't, stack beyond itself. So there is that limit to it, right? And maybe that's because, well, we're in a simpler game, so we don't need to, do too much. But it is worth noting that that's that kind of thing that can put a little bit of a cap on how much creativity you need when the thief player just goes, well, I've got advantage. Doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But that advantage does not carry over to the combat section, where it is going to be a conversation, or the thief player will have to try to put themselves into an advantageous position to get that backstab. As Teo said, it's not just you're flanking or you have an ally next to a creature, so therefore you get your extra special damage. So that is very interesting. The one of the thieves' talents is your backstab deals +1 dice of damage. So if you roll that each time that you get an additional talent, you could have up to 5 extra dice of damage when you backstab.
Which then, boy, would you want to try to milk that, right? You'd want to try to get, and I like it. I both like and it makes me curious when I read it. The word isn't hidden, but unaware, right? So that is very interesting. The goblin is unaware of you. That is an interesting word to play with and could have table variants, right? Which is kind of neat. And then maybe that's fine, but it is what it is.
And it doesn't say unaware of you. It says unaware of your attack.
Oh, yeah.
So you could be standing there right in front of it, but if it doesn't know that you're attacking, then so there's more table variance there.
Yeah.
Depending on the situation and definitions and what the game master, what the other players and what the player of the thief want or expect.
I duck behind the pillar. When I next go to attack, are you unaware of my attack? Or, someone might say, duh, you're behind the pillar. I know you're going to attack me.
Right. Or we're in a tavern and we're talking and I turn around to grab the drinks off the bar and you attack me. Is that unaware of the attack?
Yeah. Now, it does allow for ranged. It doesn't say it has to be melee or anything like that. There's that.
True.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. And let's talk quickly about the priest, who, like the game that this game is borrowing from, is a crusading Templar, prophetic shaman, or mad-eyed zealot, using the power of the gods to cleanse the unholy. Unlike some editions, they can use edged weapons like longswords, daggers, crossbows. They're proficient with all armor and shields. They know celestial, diabolic, or primordial languages. They can turn undead, and they have spell casting similar to, but not exactly like a wizard.
I played a priest, and
And
this is
turn
my
undead here is a spell, not an ability.
so
Yep.
this is my character card that I got from
Yep.
Kelsey when I played Shadowdark, and on the back, it's very similar to like D&D Encounters had for fourth edition, just a single card with all of
Mhm.
my info there, and an image on the other side, and so you can see how simple a character is. Very little to it, which is kind of cool, and I got to play that priest.
Is that a first level character?
This was I 0 or level 1? I'm plus 0 to, I'm level 1. Plus 0 to attacks. I have Cure Wounds, Shield of Faith, Turn Undead. And, that's it. I can crossbow or mace
Okay.
something at plus 0 to attack. But I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, that's cool. We'll get to magic in a bit, but there
Mhm.
are a few more bits for your character, one being a background, which is handled on one page. It just says your background knowledge may prove useful. Work with your game master to determine if your background provides advantages in a given situation. And we have a table with 20 backgrounds. From urchin to noble to minstrel to barbarian. These are from 5 to 10 words that you are given. So urchin says you grew up in the merciless streets of a large city, and that's it. So it reminded me a lot of the aspects in Fate or other similar games where you just have a phrase that's true about yourself, and you have to decide, along with the game master and the other players, if that means anything in this game.
Yeah. Yeah. It's totally that kind of creativity prompt. And you can try to push for it, which I like this kind of thing a lot, right? I like one unique thing. I prefer
Mhm.
to make it up. It doesn't say this is a guideline, like this is the phrase you get. Whereas I would like this to
Mhm.
be an example guideline to encourage me to come up with something similar, but that might, be a little more applicable. But then again, this is a character that could easily die, so maybe you don't want to invest that much into your character yet.
Mhm. We also get to choose an alignment which defines your role in the clash of good versus evil. All creatures are connected to the eternal conflict waged between law, chaos, and neutrality, whether they know it or not. Law is benevolence, chaos is malevolence, and neutrality is impartial, favoring neither. So you can be one of those three: chaotic, lawful, or neutral.
Yeah, how do you
We
feel,
don't get
Shawn,
anything
about
more.
removing good and
Mhm.
evil from it? Like, what do you think of as a designer with
I'm
that?
I'm fine with it. I'm fine with it because for me, alignment as it is used in D&D is obsolete technology
Mm,
uh, that never really does anything that adds to the game in a way that is pleasing to me. It is much better to give me some traits,
mhm.
some of these background traits or personality traits, than it is to just slap a tag on something
Yeah,
and try to make it mean more than it does.
yeah, that's fair. And maybe streamlining it like this, it makes it a little easier to just orient the world and move on. Yep.
Mhm. Yeah. Could the game have just said good, evil, and neutral?
Mm,
Possibly. But I think even the philosophical arguments about good and evil can overwhelm people's understanding and enjoyment of the game. So I'm actually fine with going lawful, chaos, and neutral as they are defined as malevolent, benevolent, and in between.
Yeah, and it goes back to the roots of the game too. The deities section plays
Mhm.
off of this further, so it has a few gods, really, just a few that it lists in the deities section, and those are come with the tag of being lawful or neutral or chaotic, and we're told that priests have to choose one god to serve faithfully. The priest can revoke the gift of spellcasting if you commit blasphemous acts. I certainly came to close to that in
Mhm.
my game, as I was tempted by another deity or force or something entity. Most folk worship one of the
Mhm.
four lords, the lawful neutral gods. If you're evil, you probably worship a member of the dark trio. And there were originally 9. We get a little world building. 2 are the lost, forbidden, or forgotten. But many folks will still say things like beneath the eyes of the 9, referring to all 9 of them.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm cool with this. I don't think the game or the world, at least in my reading so far, has called for there to be any more than this.
Yeah. Well, then, it's interesting then the game leans in further, right? Because we're like, okay, deities, sure, that makes sense. That plays off alignment. And we go to the next thing, which is titles, and those play off of alignment. And I thought this was a really
Mhm.
interesting sort of world building kind of stand in. So as you gain levels, gain a title. And this is very old school, right? Like AD&D would have the name of your title, what people would refer to you as, a footpad or whatever, as when you're a rogue.
Mhm.
This does the same, but it does so in columns by alignment. So when you're in a level 1 to 2 thief, you are a footpad if you're lawful, a thug if you're
Mhm.
chaotic, and a robber if you're neutral. Oh, that's so interesting to distinguish this in that manner, which suggests that these have meaning to society at large, right? That, oh, yeah, they're a channeler, and we would, I guess, know that they are a chaotic wizard, level 3 to 4. I thought that was
Mhm.
really interesting. Hmm.
Yeah, I I looked at this and I thought nostalgia or something really, really useful. And it could be made to be useful for sure, as you say, by if these titles are what you are referred to by
Mhm.
as enemies talk about you, or as allies talk about you, or
Yeah.
as the city watch understands you. But if it's not going to be used that way, I'm just as fine tossing them out.
Yeah.
And it can be fun the first time to, oh, I am a Reaver now because I'm a chaotic fighter of 7th and 8th level. But then it's just like, oh, well, okay, I just want to be Bob the fighter. So I'm not going to ever refer to this chart again.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing is the next part that comes up, which is starting gear. This, you have
Mhm.
a table and a roll. So as far as I can tell, okay, so yeah, well, sorry, when you're 0 level, you must roll. That's what it is. 0 level,
Mhm.
you roll
Right.
1d4. That's how many items you get. And then you roll d12 to see which items those are. So it could be old daggers or it could be, a torch and a crowbar. When
Mhm.
you're first level, you get gold pieces, a random amount. And now you can buy gear from the full list
Mhm.
of gear. Armor class is
Yeah.
calculated the way you might expect if you've played 5th edition. I think the big thing about gear is the fact that it has gear slots. I think in general,
Mhm.
the gear is made to be useful and more evocative in play. We've got the 10-foot pole in a game that's dangerous. That becomes, again, more important. The torch is, of course, very important, though at this point, we haven't quite heard why. But at least we've been told that. And it burns for an hour of real time.
Mhm.
Um, and gear slots is the number of items equal to your strength stat or 10, whichever is higher.
Mhm.
And it may not be immediately obvious, but it fills up really quickly. If you get what's called a crawling kit, which costs 7 gold, that uses 7 gear slots, and that gives you backpack, flint and steel, torch, rations, iron spikes, grappling hook, and 60 feet of rope. If you have a strength of 10, you would, or lower, you would only get 3 empty spots to carry the loot, which is how you're going to level up, right?
Yeah, that doesn't include weapons.
Or
So
armor.
you're a 10 strength rogue. Yeah, or armor. 10 strength rogue. If you want armor, a melee weapon, and a missile weapon, there's a good chance now that all your slots are used up if you have this crawling kit. Uh, and in order to rest, little sneak preview, you need rations.
Yeah.
Now, 3 rations take up 1 slot, but unless you're able to find rations along the way, you only have 3 rests worth, and that's if you are able to successfully rest. If your rest is interrupted, you have to use more rations than you normally would in order to get that full rest. So you're already balancing out what you can bring. You're going to need torches. You're going to need rations. So plan carefully.
It is really interesting because when you often think of like 5th edition, you'll sit there with the table and go like, oh, I'll use a great axe. That's great. And you're like, oh, great axe, 2 slots. Oh, do I want that for to deal D10 damage? Maybe I should go down to something else that just uses a single slot, right? Comes a tough question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like this. I like the simplicity of it.
Mm-hmm.
It fits well with this game.
Yeah.
If this was tried to be used in a more complex game that wasn't sort of shorthanding some things, I wouldn't like it, but I think it fits very well for what the game is trying to do.
I agree with you. And one of the nice things about that video was it talked about that you did not watch. It talked about all of these different subsystems. They appear kind of elsewhere in some form or another, right? So Knave has equipment slots, and some other games have that. And Four Torches Deep has some torch concepts, and a lot of these sort of OSR, OSE type games will have some of these aspects. But what I find when I read Shadowdark as opposed to reading those other games is Shadowdark is the game where they all, to me, feel like they cohesively weave together, and not in a way that intrude upon one another or that make me feel like it's almost like a gimmick where like something's going to go, like the play is about this, almost like board game like, and it's going to intrude upon the other things I like about a role-playing game experience. So it was interesting in that video, Kelsey says, she says something, I don't know the exact quote, but something like, none of the things in this game are an original thought of mine. Right? Which is a very humble thing to say. But I think she's acknowledging, I'm using a lot of great ideas that I've been playing with and playtesting in my games as I pull all these things together. This is how I like that mix. But and maybe we could say the beauty of this game is how she has distilled that mix together, right? Including 5th edition down into these pieces such that they don't intrude upon another the way I personally find they do in other games.
Absolutely. I can't argue with any of that. Seems reasonable and quite astute.
Well, thank you.
Next week, I was complimenting Kelson at you.
Oh, thank goodness. Phew.
We get a table of names, 1 to 20 for dwarf, elf, goblin, halfling, half-orc, and humans. So as your first level or even 0 level characters die, you can roll a 17, and you are a half-orc, so you are Ibarra. Congratulations. Then we get to leveling. Leveling, interesting. We are going to use experience points. They represent your learning, your influence, and your increasing skill. To gain a level, you need to gain 10 times your current level of experience points.
Mhm.
So if you're first level, you need 10 experience points to go to second level. Once you level, your XP resets back to 0. So from first to second level is 10. From ninth to 10th level is 100. 10 times the level,
You want to get
well,
to.
from 9 to 10,
Yeah.
yeah, is 90. So you need 90 resetting to 0 after you go from 8 to 9. Uh, we'll talk later about the ways that you can gain experience points, which is an interesting thing. When you gain a level, you also gain one role on your class's talent table at the indicated levels. And if you roll the same talent twice, you stack them. You also increase your hit points when you increase in levels. Any other thoughts on XP, just as a basic thing here before we jump in later into how you get those?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, we've mentioned, spoiler for ahead that, it has to do with loot. And I think it's interesting that here it doesn't
Mhm.
tell you kind of that. And so if you are familiar with other games, or even if you aren't, you kind of have no basis for what this means, right? Will I role play? Will I slay monsters? Will I disarm traps? No, none of those. You will gain loot. And that is an interesting piece both for the players and the DM that is not established here. It's a good example of where the game is not talking to you about the gameplay at this moment, despite how incredibly important it is to the game, right? It's not coloring this as this is a game where you will try to gain treasure. When you gain enough, you're going to level. Your
Mhm.
GM has rules. Here are your tables, so you can track this.
Mhm.
But also, what it does by having the system is it says, we're not going with milestone XP, and we're not going with, when
Mhm.
you, it's not quest XP for completing finishing the module or slaying the demon, stopping the
Mhm.
ritual. Like this is that changes what the game's like. So it's hugely important, and yet not at all evident from this page, I would say, which is fine. But that's just
Right.
the approach taken, right?
Yeah.
It's no extra words are being spent here. This is all of your XP to
Mhm.
players is done in one page, which is a very
Yep.
small book, right? It's amazing. It's a novel sized page with large font, and that is your whole XP system. If you asked me to spend this many words on an XP system, I don't know what I'd come up with, but it would have to be, I would probably spend just, I don't know how long. My whole life would be dedicated because that is my weakness. Like my kryptonite is writing things briefly, and it's amazing how well this works, right? And part of the way it does it is by not saying a lot right now.
Mhm. Right. And then what we will look at later is where could there have been words spent to codify something a bit more to make it understood better or make it work as a game better.
Yeah.
So that'll be down the road. Do we tackle magic now or do we wait?
Your choice, my friend. I'm good either way.
Let's do it. Let's
All
go.
right.
We're going to tackle magic right now. So,
Oh,
magic in
it's
this
magic.
game is, yes, it is. It's magic and it costs you your action to cast a spell. You must have the spellcasting talent to do so, either as a priest or a wizard in the basic rules of the game. And rather than trying to overcome something about your target, spellcasting in this game is making a spellcasting check. So you roll a d20 and you add your attribute, which is wisdom for priests or intelligence for wizards. You're adding that modifier to it. And you must succeed on a DC based on the tier of the spell you're casting. So a level one or a tier one spell, the lowest level spell, it would be an 11. So you'd need to get an 11 or higher to successfully cast the spell. It's not dependent on anything on the creature side,
Yeah.
which is interesting. It is very much unlike a lot of things that we've seen in D&D type games. If your check succeeds, the spell works.
Yeah.
If your check fails, the spell does not take effect. And yes, there's an and. Not only does nothing good happen on your side, you cannot cast that spell again until you complete a rest.
Yes. Well, it's a fascinating part of the design because, like in our game, which Kelsey was the DM for at GameholeCon, one of the players, or their first time that they cast, they botched the roll, which is easy to do, right? It's a D20, and you think, oh, it'll be so easy to hit that 11, and then you roll, a 5, and you look at your modifier and you go, well, that doesn't do it. And these are pretty good characters. Like my character has a 17 wisdom. That's really strong. So I'm +3 to my roll. It still means that I need to get an 8 or higher, right? And that's a fair amount of possibility, but you could easily have a 14 in that best skill attribute score. And now you're at, at a +2, and it gets harder and harder. And so what happened with this player is, they failed the spell. A couple of things can happen, as we'll talk about, but one of them is you now don't get to cast that spell anymore. So it's like an at-will spell until it isn't, because you failed the roll, and now your action was wasted and possibly more.
Which is interesting in the sense that you are going to fail a lot compared to other games that we might be used to.
Yeah.
And if you roll a 1 on the check, even worse things happen.
Mm-hmm.
For wizards, there's a roll on the mishap table. So a piece of equipment you own might disappear. I hope it's not your wand. And if you're a priest, you not only can't cast that spell until you rest, you also can't cast it until you perform ritualistic penance, like a holy quest or ritual atonement or a material sacrifice.
Yeah.
However, if you roll a crit, you are allowed to double one of the spell's numerical effects.
Mm-hmm.
One would imagine, without seeing the spells, that might be double the dice that you roll for damage, or double the duration of the spell, or double some other numerical representation, which I thought was really clever, but also very problematic unless you very carefully vet all your spells to make sure there's none where doubling a numerical effect on it could be out of control.
Yeah.
So
and
that's where my designer mind went.
Or useless, right? So like I just opened a random page in the spell section, and here are silence and sleep.
Yeah.
Both of them have no numeric effect.
Mm-hmm.
So, and
not even duration.
Nope, because it's focus for silence, and so you'd have to adjudicate something if you want to, because there is nothing here. And in fact, a lot of the spells on this page, I think only one of them has a numeric effect on this particular page, and that might not be true if I go to the next page. But so yeah, it's that kind of thing where it's a fun concept, but what do you do, right? And we're not spending a lot of time on guidance here, so
yeah. And the designer in me loves this, that it can really change the way a player has to approach the game. It cannot just be, I'm going to set back and cast the same spell over and over and over again because there's the chance I'm going to lose that spell. So I need to think on my feet. Absolutely love that. Games like this, where something quite powerfully bad can happen fairly easily, generally has a system in place where you can buy off that bad effect with some sort of in-game currency, not gold, but some sort of mechanical currency. In this case, as we will talk about later, you have something called a luck token. that you can get and re-roll, um,
Yep.
which is, I think, necessary. The other thing is when we looked at the talents for the wizard, one of the things was you have advantage with certain spells. So right there, your chances of losing that spell that you choose goes down dramatically once you have advantage. Um, so it sort of the game system itself works to minimize what seems like a pretty drastic uh, negative effect of not succeeding.
Yeah, though I would say, and I mean, you're saying this too, it does so in a way that's a little erratic, right? It'll depend on implementation, depend on whether your
Mhm.
GM is awarding you luck, depend on whether you can take
Mhm.
those mitigating features, happen to roll for that talent, right? And so it could also be that the opposite happens. You know, I've got my priest who can cast Cure Wounds and Shield of Faith. Maybe my first two attempts to those botch, and all I'm left with is turn undead. And if there are no undead in this adventure, well, all I'm doing is attacking at +0 with my mace and my crossbow. That's all I've got, right? For as long as our session
Mhm.
goes. And in fact, because I'm a priest, I now need to atone, and I'm a starting character. I may not have the gold to atone properly. So, you know, who knows, right? Now, a clever GM,
Yeah.
they will do things like maybe offer me a deal with a
Mhm.
powerful entity in exchange for refreshing one of my spells or something like that. And that's totally great, but it's not based on words in this book.
That's true. And that is always one of the joys and or frustrations of games that do rely on this. And we'll talk about this a lot more next time. Is the experience with a great GM can be great, and the experience with a less than great GM can be less than great.
Yeah.
So it's always important to recognize that in a game or any activity where it relies on that sort of understanding and imagination and group empathy
Yeah.
for the table and all the players as a whole.
Yeah, and along those lines, Shawn, so scrolls and wands are one of the ways that you as GM could try to maybe help with this, right? So you could
Mhm.
give your spellcasters some scrolls that they could use to supplement for those times when they hit upon bad luck. Scrolls and wands also require spellcaster checks. So you could be that you give someone a
Mhm.
scroll and then they spend their action failing on it. The scroll is used up either way, whether it succeeds or fails. The wand, if you fail, you can't use it until you rest. Crits still cause a mishap, and the wand breaks or the scroll is used up. So, you know, you can help a bit with that, but boy, a character that likes to roll the way I like to roll, or a player that rolls that way, bad luck will find you and hurt you. Um, and there's
Yeah.
also a system for concentration, which I thought was interesting, Shawn.
Yeah, it's called focus. So if it's a spell that lasts for longer than a round, it may have a focus tag to it, which means you have to continue to make checks. It doesn't just remain in effect. At the start of your turn, if you want to maintain focus, you have to make a new check. If you fail, it ends it. And you always have that chance to roll either a 20 or a 1 to get a critical success or a a bad thing happening as you try to focus on it.
Yeah. And if you take damage or you become distracted, the GM can say, make a focus check as well. So there is
Mhm.
that sort of peril a bit of the focus system that this could go wrong if you're unlucky.
Yep. And spells have tiers as opposed to levels. So tiers 1 through 5 uh, makes sense. Those of you who play D&D will recognize some of the spells or some of the tier levels matches. There are some new spells such as Pillar of Salt, which can turn enemies into hardened salt statues if you are able to successfully focus for 3 rounds. So without looking at the monsters and know what they can do, this shows you that sort of power that can come with a magic using character in this game.
Yeah. And did you say the word
If they
permanent?
roll poorly, yes,
Yeah.
permanent.
Because that's the part that
So
I was
yeah,
like, oh,
you're
wow. Okay.
yeah. And to me, this harkens back to the earliest days of D&D, when at low levels, wizards and other magic users were very, very squishy. And by high levels, they were dominating everything. This sort of does the same thing, but in a different way by not having saving throws that creatures can make. So you can walk up, unless the monster has a particular ability that stops this from happening. You can walk up to a very powerful monster, and if you can focus for 3 rounds, they are permanently turned to salt, and they can't stop it.
Yeah.
However, being able to focus for those 3 rounds without losing focus by making a poor check or by getting attacked is a whole other thing that the game master will need to be aware of. So I like the idea. I would need to
Mm-hmm.
play a lot of it to
Yeah.
figure out if the balance is there that I think this rule or these rules are going for.
Right.
But I want to say off the top, I like it. I like the chaos of it because this whole game is going to be chaotic in that way.
Yeah. It's really interesting. Power Word Kill is a tier 5 wizard spell. Range near.
Mhm.
You utter the word of doom. One creature you target of level 9 or less dies if it hears you. Treat a failed spellcasting check for this spell as a critical failure and roll the mishap with disadvantage. So it's got this double edge, right? It's got a little bit of extra danger to it when you roll when you cast Power Word Kill, right? It's not to be used lightly because you need a way to maybe mitigate this failure because of that, right? Like, it's interesting. It was interesting to me given the nature of the game, and this is the kind of thing where I wish there were more words helping me, because I'm feeling it's very dungeon, and then I get the plane shift spell, and I think, whoa, what do I do with that? Where do I go?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and
yeah,
obviously I can weave that into an adventure, but the game itself is not telling me what to really do with that spell that I wouldn't do with teleport, right? Because plane shift is a whole nother thing beyond that. But for that, I need to know so much more. I thought it was very interesting that there are some spells in here that are like that. And it's not the only one, where it hints at a much larger game than what I would guess from what I'm reading.
Yeah. And I noted that as well. And I can't wait to read more so I can tell if this game, if the rules inform a world like they would inform a story using those rules.
Yeah.
And we'll find out more next time when we get into the gameplay section of Shadowdark. I want to thank you, Teos, for sharing your expertise with us as always.
Thank
And
you,
I
Shawn.
want to thank everyone out there for listening. We have some supporters who help us by supporting our Patreon. We want to thank them for helping us keep up our energy, keep up our technology, and make this show happen. So thank you to our Master of Dungeon supporters. Our Master of Realm supporters get a shout out in our show notes, and our Masters of the Multiverse, well, here we go with them. Chris Webster, Graham Ward, James Walton, Joe Tyler, Trace, Krishna Simose, Andy Shockney, Ross Sandberg, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Vladimir Prenner from Croatia, Robert Pasley, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Mighty Zeus, Mike Olson, Falcon Neal, Sean Molly, the Micro Ant, Eric Mengi, the Mathemagician, Chad Lynch, Jim Klingler, aka DM Prime Mover, Brian King, Moment of Silence for the Lions, Chad Jackson, Sean Hurst, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, The Mighty Jerd, Nathan Fuller, Andy Edmonds at Nerdronomicon, Seth Eckel, Darren Chandler, Evil John, Merrick Blackman, Steve Bissonette, Craig Bailey, and Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing. Thank you so much for your support. You, yes, you could help us out by becoming a patron by going to patreon.com/masteringdnd. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can also support us by leaving us a review by whatever means you listen to this podcast. And you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, which would help us out immensely. Teos, where are you and what have you been up to on the interweb?
Ooh, if you want to hear me be perplexed, my latest video on the Spelljammer Neverwinter MMO is all about their orc versus elf storyline. And whatever you want to imagine that's horrid, it is horrid. So it's literally the first video I've had where I could just make an amazed face and put it on the thumbnail because I was amazed at whatever team came up with this storyline that is so bad and so tropish. So that's my most recent endeavor, but you can get to all of it from alphastream.org for all your elf versus orc horribleness.
Okay. And you can find me on Twitter or Blue Sky or Mastodon, all at Sean Merwin in one way or another. And at Mastering D&D is also out there on all of those social media platforms. Join our community, and you can talk to us via our Discord if you join the Patreon, or you can go to the Mastering Dungeons YouTube channel. So, Teos, we are about to go deep into the Shadowdark. What are we going to do now?
I'm going to light a torch and go finish watching that awesome Ghostfire Gaming YouTube that I just started watching today. I saw you post about it on Mastodon. Ben Burns creating all this excitement for everything that's coming from Ghostfire. So I'm going to go finish watching that. How about you, Sean?
Yeah, I am going to go take a long rest because I am all out of spells.